to me. Whoa, it ain't nothing but a heartbreak. Whoa, friend only to the undertaker. Oh, this is into all things. The thought of war blows my mind. War has caused them rage within the younger generation. Induction, then destruction. Who wants to die? Oh, war. Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely. Sad. War. Oh, yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely. Listen to me. War. It ain't nothing but a heartbreaker. War. Got one friend, that's the undertaker. Oh, and shining as many young men's dreams. Maybe this ain't home to her and me. Life is much too short and precious. It's been fighting wars each day. Walking and
What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. I will continue to examine 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters of all time. Shout out to Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Had to play his theme song, War. Because Marvelous Marvin Hagler will always be recognized on this platform as Marvelous Marvin Hagler. He believed he was marvelous, so much so. In fact, he didn't believe it, he knew it. That he would go down to the press and ask them to refer to him as Marvelous Marvin Hagler. They said, Marvin, we can't do it. Unless you go down and legalize your name, we cannot do it. And that's what he has done. And for that reason, I, Scrapbook Boxing, will refer to Marvin Hagler as Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Let's take a look at his career. Now, he was born Marvin Nathaniel Hagler. He would change his name to Marvelous Marvin Hagler. He was born May 23rd, 1954, in Newark, New Jersey. Let's stop right there. Marvelous Marvin Hagler's mother would relocate him from Newark, New Jersey to Boston, Massachusetts after the riots. There were riots in Detroit, riots in Newark, riots in New York. And she wanted to care for her son, put him in better hands than where he was. Because Marvin, at that time, Hayes Projects, he was in a bad neighborhood. And he needed a little more guidance than what he was getting. And it turned out to be a very good move. So Marvelous Marvin Hagler stood 5'9.5". He was a southpaw. He weighed anywhere between 155 to 160 pounds. Let's stop right there. Marvelous Marvin Hagler always put me in mind of a colored middleweight who would win a title. He was a colored middleweight champion. And his name was Larry Estridge. He was a southpaw. Stood anywhere between 5'9.5" to 5'10", as Marvelous Marvin Hagler did. He was a mean puncher, as Marvelous Marvin Hagler was. And Larry Estridge would lose recognition as colored middleweight champion when Theodore Tiger Flowers, the Georgia Deacon, would defeat Harry Greb in 1926 to become the world and first black middleweight champion in boxing history. So once the toy bulldog, Mickey Walker, would defeat Theodore Tiger Flowers, the colored middleweight championship division would now be re-recognized. So you would have Jack McVeigh. He was known as the Pride of Harlem. He would then become the colored middleweight champion, but he would be dethroned by the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith, 1929. Now, Harry Smith had an opportunity to become the world middleweight champion, but he was denied that opportunity because the toy bulldog Mickey Walker had stated in his contract that when he won the middleweight championship belt, he would withhold, he would block, he would not fight a black fighter. And for that reason, the Harlem Thunderbolt, or even Jack McVeigh for that matter, would never get that opportunity. You had 3 black fighters that was in the top 5 during Mickey Walker's reign. You had Lynn Johnson out of the UK, William Gorilla Jones, and Harry Smith. There were 3 black fighters in the top 5. Mickey Walker would decide to relinquish his middleweight championship crown because he had to fight one of them. And he would go up to the light heavyweight division. They would create a tournament in that middleweight division. Dave Brown, who was the manager of Harry Smith, didn't put him in that tournament. Lynn Johnson could not fight in the UK for a middleweight title. Tried that once before. And because of a rule, he was not allowed as a black fighter to fight for that crown in the UK. The only one left would be William Gorilla Jones. He would get his shot. He would become the world middleweight champion. And he would be the second black world middleweight champion in boxing history. Well, Larry Estridge reminded me of Marvelous Marvin Hagler in his demeanor, personality, and his boxing style. It would have been something to see Marvelous Marvin Hagler and the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith. Oh, that would have been something. Because Harry Smith had an amateur record of 60 wins and 55 consecutive knockouts. He could punch. Then later in his professional career, he would slack off. He wanted to become a dentist. His father wanted him to become a dentist. He owned real estate and limousine and taxi companies. He was a business mogul, was his father. And all his father wanted from Harry Smith was to become a dentist. But Marvelous Marvin Hagler was something else. His mother would put him in the hands of the Petronelli brothers. That was Goody and Pat Petronelli. And Marvin would win the National AAU Middleweight Championship belt in 1973. He would turn professional that same year. May 18th, 1973. And he would knock out Terry Ryan in 2 rounds in Brockton, Massachusetts. That was his professional debut. He would get right back in the ring July 25th, 1973, and he would take on Sonny Williams in Boston, Massachusetts. He would defeat him in 6 rounds. Now, that would be his first 6-round fight. He would go to distance. His next fight would be August 8th, 1973, against Muhammad Smith in Boston, Massachusetts. He would knock him out in 2 rounds. I want you to see the pattern. October 6, 1973, he would take on Don Digfall in Brockton, Massachusetts. And he would go the distance of 8 rounds in his first 8-round affair. October 26, 1973, he would take on Cove Green in Brockton, Massachusetts, knocking him out in 4 rounds. November 18th, Coco Kidd, Brockton, Massachusetts. He went in 2 rounds. December 7th, Manny Freitas, Portland. He would go in 1 round. December 18th, James Redford, Brockton, Massachusetts. He would go in 4 rounds. He actually fought him in Boston. I want you to see the pattern. Marvin Hagler started out with a second round knockout. 4 rounds. He always won 3 rounds. He knew there was no problem there. Then he would take on Sonny Williams. 6-round affair. It went the distance. He wanted to pace himself to make sure he can do the 6 rounds. Took on Muhammad Smith. 2nd round knockout when he was secure of the 8 rounds that he can go. He went on and fought the man. Don Wigfall went 8 rounds, went the distance. He wanted to get the experience, and he'd never gone 8 rounds before. And after that, all knockouts. Marvin was a very strategic thinker, planner, and doer. He processed things well. He can outthink the thinkers, outbox the boxers, and outpunch the punchers. 1974, February 5th to be exact. He'd be in a ring with Bob Harrington in Boston, Massachusetts. He was stopped in 5 rounds. So that year, he would have all knockouts and all technical knockouts. All but his last fight that year. August 30th, 1974. He'd be in a ring with Sugar Ray Seals, Boston, Massachusetts, and he would go 10 rounds. Now, Marvin would begin to have problems with the sugars. Sugar Ray Seals was a 1972 Olympian. Now, he would defeat Sugar Ray Seals in 10 rounds. October 29th, 1974. He would take on Morris Jordan, New Bedford. He would basically be a technical knockout. The referee would have to jump in, say no more. 4 rounds. Take on George Green. But he would fight Sugar Ray Seals November 26th of 1974, Seattle, Washington. That would be the first blemish on Marvin Hagler's record. It would go 10 rounds, but it would be a draw. And Sugar Ray Seals was a very witty fighter. I had the pleasure of meeting Sugar Ray Seals, by the way. And it was sad because he went blind. He was legally blind. Now, Sugar Ray Seals was a very good fighter. He won the Olympics. But he gave fighters problems. But Marvin always got his revenge. December 20th of that year, 74. He would take on D.C. Walker in Boston, Massachusetts. And he would stop him in 2 rounds. February 15th, 1975. Once again, he'd be in the ring with Don Wigfall, Boston, Massachusetts. This time, he would get rid of him in 5 rounds. Now, remember, I told you that he went the distance in 8 rounds with Don Wigfall. He had to get that get back. Took him out in 5 rounds. He would take on fighters such as Joey Blair, Jimmy Owens twice. He would win on a disqualification the 2nd time he fought Jimmy Owens. Back to back, it was April 14th and May 24th. And he would either get a knockout or a technical knockout in 1975, except for the win disqualification of Jimmy Owens. But then he would head down to Philadelphia, January 13th, 1976. And he would suffer his first defeat in 10 rounds against Bobby Boogaloo Watts of Philadelphia. And it's really hurt Marvin because Marvin was on a roll. And Marvin was about that get back. Had that Joe Louis mentality. That Ray Robinson mentality. He scored a technical knockout over Matt Donovan, February 7th, 1976. But then he would suffer his 2nd loss, March 9th, 1976, against Willie the Worm Monroe. It would be a 10-round loss for him. Once again, and Philadelphia. But he would take it out on Eugene Cyclone Hart, September 14th, 1976, in Philadelphia. Referee would jump in after 8 rounds. Said no more. Marvin would then take on George Davis, December 21st, 1976. But the following year of 1977, that's when the lights would go out in New York City. You would have a famous song by the Tramps, Where Were You, when the lights went out? Well, the lights would go out on February 15th of that year, 77, against Willie the Worm Monroe in Boston. In front of his hometown. Marvin would get rid of him in 12 rounds. Referee had to say no more. Enough is enough. Marvin was about that get back. And he would knock out the rest of his opponents. Some would be technical knockouts. Went the distance with Jim Henry, October 15th, 1977, Providence, Rhode Island, 10 rounds. 1978, all knockouts. He would go the distance with Bad Benny Briscoe. Now, I was at that fight on August 24th of 78. And that same year, I went to go see Yaki Lopez and Matthew Saad Muhammad. They were both at the Philadelphia Spectrum. 78 had some of the greatest fights. You had Larry Holmes and Ken Norton, Muhammad Ali, and Leon Spinks. You had another fight that I had the privilege to attend. It was in Rahway State Prison. And that was with James Scott and a fighter by the name of Eddie Richardson. No, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, but his name was Eddie Gregory, was his name. And he defeated Eddie Gregory, who was Eddie Mustafa Muhammad. Did James Scott. That was in Rahway State Prison. I had the pleasure of going there to see that fight. It was on television, by the way. But Marvin Hagler took on Philadelphia fighters, man. He would stop Willie Warren in 78. February 3rd, 1979, he would take on Sugar Ray Seals in Boston, Massachusetts, and he would stop him in 1 round. It was about that get back. November 30th, he'd be in the ring with Vito Antuofermo, Las Vegas, Nevada. It was for the World Middleweight Championship belt. Let me tell you how Marvin Hagler was always second to Ray Leonard. He always had problems with the sugars. Because Ray Leonard would fight Wilfred Benitez on the main event of that card for the WBC Welterweight Championship crown. He would defeat Wilfred Benitez, 14-round stoppage. And he would become the welterweight champion of the world. Well, on the undercard, Marvin Hagler, Vito Antuofermo would be considered a draw. And Marvin always felt as though he was on the shadow or the coattails of Ray Leonard. Now, see, Ray Leonard would earn $40,000 in his first fight. Marvin Hagler got like $50 for his first fight. But Marvin would get a second opportunity. September 27th of 1980, he would take on Alan Mentor in Willsby Stadium. He would score a technical knockout in 3 rounds. He would become the world middleweight champion. Guess what happened to Marvin? They would throw everything but the kitchen sink in that ring. They had to barricade Marvin Hagler and escort him back to the locker room, where there he would get the benefit of enjoying his titles. And that reminded me in Mexico City in 1945, second round knockout, of Wanzarita, Ike Williams, was being hit by half-eaten sandwiches and bottles and popcorn as he was being escorted in high speed, I might add, back to his locker room to receive his belt. It was the NBA version of the light heavyweight championship titles. So Marvin Hagler would now be champion. He would take on Vito Antuofermo June 13th of 81. The fight would be stopped in 5 rounds. It was in defense of his World Middleweight Championship crown. Now, you had Panama Lewis in that corner. Freddie Brown in the corner. Ray Arcel was also in that corner of Vito Antuofermo. I used to see them guys in Gleason's gym when it was on 30th Street in New York all the time. They stopped it because of the cut that Vito Antuofermo would suffer from a punch. And they said no more, and Marvin would get his revenge. He would take on Mustafa Hamshaw, October 3rd, 1981. With 11th round technical knockout, he would retain his World Middleweight Championship belt. He would have 3 title defenses in 1981. 1982, he would take on Caveman Lee in Atlantic City. Stop him in 1 round. I was at that fight. He would retain his middleweight championship title. Have a few more defenses with Tony Simpson, Wilfred Ciprian, and Roberto Duran in 1983. He would defend his title each time. With Roberto Duran, he would go to full 15 rounds. Duran was a little more witty than some of the other fellas. But the night I most remember happened on the year of 1984. Juan Domingo Rodan, 10-round technical knockout with a beating he received. But I was at the New York Madison Square Garden, October 19th, 1984, when he would rematch Mustafa Hamshaw. I was in the second row. Marvin would get rid of him in 3 rounds. Marvin looked like a body of armor. And he always put baby oil on his skin, his shiny bald head. He came out with a vengeance, man. Mustafa Hamshaw was always a very tough young man. I remember Buddy McGirt stating his first 10-round fight he would spar with Mustafa Hamshaw. And he would go, I think, 4 rounds with him or 3 rounds with him in sparring. And he said it felt like he went 10 rounds with Mustafa Hamshaw. That was a beating Mustafa Hamshaw would receive from Marvin Hagler. But Mustafa Hamshaw would return the favor to Bobby Ches and giving him his first loss. Really gave Bobby Chev a whipping. I was at that fight. April 15th, Tax Day, 1985, Las Vegas, Nevada. I was at that fight. Marvelous Marvin Hagler and Thomas, the Hitman Hearns. Got rid of him in 3 rounds. Thomas Hearns had called a round. And he gave the details as to what would happen after the round was finished. He stated that the fight wouldn't go 3 rounds and a man would be carried out of the ring. He didn't say who. Hearns was correct on his prediction. Didn't go 3 rounds. But the man who was carried out of the ring was him. And Marvin Hagler, marvelous Marvin Hagler, had put on a show that night, as did Thomas the Hitman Hearns. It was one of the most courageous and exciting fights I've ever been to. And I've been through some. I was at the Sanchez and Gomez fight. I was at the Cornelius Boza Edwards, Bobby Ches fight. I was at the Bobby Ches and Bobby Chacon fight. I was at the Bobby Chacon and Cornelius Boza Edwards fight. I was at all Gotti and Ward, all three of those fights. I was at the Jose Luis Castillo fight when he fought Corrales, Diego Corrales, ringside at that fight. I've been through a lot of Alexis Aguirre and Pryor. I was at a lot of those kind of fights, but this fight had something special. And Marvin felt he got his respect. That fight was originally supposed to take place in 1982. March 10th, 1986, I was at that fight with John the Beast Mugabe. What a fight that was. Oh. It was raining that day. We all purchased ponchos. I think it was $2 or so. And you had Gaby Canizales. He was a younger brother of Orlando Canizales. And he was knocked out by Richie Sandoval. And Gaby Canizales knocked out Richie Sandoval. And they had to take him to the hospital. Pull up an ambulance, put him in a gurney, took him to the hospital. Meanwhile, it's raining outside. And then we saw Thomas the Hitman Hearns put the smashed right hand between the gloves of James Black and Gold Schuler of Philadelphia. He was a decorated amateur. We thought he had to go to the hospital because he was out flat. But then Marvelous Marvin Hagler would be in the ring with John the Beast Mugabe. And what a fight that was. And that's when Ray Leonard noticed that Hagler couldn't move. All he had to do was just move away side to side away from Hagler. He called Mike Trainer and said, please, get this thing going ASAP. And I didn't like that fight. They gave Ray Leonard the victory. And there were stipulations in that fight that handicapped Hagler to some extent. So overall, that's the gist of Marvelous Marvin Hagler's career. I just wanted to go over it with you. He will be added to the list of 100 years. Greatest 150 black fighters of all time. Shout out to Marvelous Marvin Hagler.
Just give me the night. Give me the night. Undisputed middleweight champion of the world, marvelous Marvin Hagler. Really rocked him another right hand. He's got him in trouble. He's on the rope, and that's it.
Marvin Hagler, marvelous Marvin Hagler, and the great Charlie Burley. What a match that would have been. Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All Greek fights and all Greek fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters of all times.